On the evening of November 14, 1985, in the quiet suburb of Rockville, Maryland, 23-year-old Marcus Jenkins stood behind the counter of a Burger King restaurant, his polyester uniform already soaked with the smell of French fry grease after 8 hours of the dinner rush. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night, watching the clock inch toward closing time. He believed this Thursday would end like any other, with him locking up, driving his beat-up Ford Escort back to his tiny apartment, and collapsing in front of the television. He had no idea that in less than 3 hours, a chance observation would trigger a chain of events that would expose one of the most devastating Soviet spy networks in American history. What Marcus thought was just another strange customer would prove to be the final link in a puzzle that had consumed the Federal Bureau of Investigation for nearly 8 months. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. The year 1985 had already earned its infamous title in intelligence circles. The press had dubbed it the Year of the Spy, as one espionage case after another unfolded across the United States like dominoes falling in terrible succession. John Anthony Walker, Jr., a former Navy warrant officer, had been arrested back in May after his ex-wife finally found the courage to turn him in to federal authorities. Walker had spent nearly 18 years selling cryptographic secrets to the Soviet Union, compromising over 1 million classified naval messages and recruiting his own brother, his son, and his best friend into his treasonous network. The damage assessment was still ongoing, but defense officials were calling it potentially catastrophic to national security. Ronald Pelton, a former National Security Agency communications specialist, had been arrested just days before Marcus's shift that Thursday evening. Pelton had walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington after resigning from the NSA and offered to sell secrets for cash, providing classified information about United States collection programs targeting the Soviets for 5 long years. Then there was Jonathan Pollard, arrested barely a week earlier, who had been passing classified documents to Israeli intelligence from his position as a Navy intelligence analyst. The American intelligence community was reeling, trying to understand how so many of their own had turned against them. But there was one case that remained frustratingly open, one that had FBI agents in the Norfolk and Washington field offices working around the clock, with nothing to show for their efforts. Somewhere in the sprawling suburbs around the nation's capital, they knew another spy was operating. They had fragments of intelligence from various sources, whispers from signals intercepts, patterns that suggested someone with access to highly sensitive naval communications was still active. They just couldn't identify who. Marcus Jenkins knew nothing of these shadowy games being played in the corridors of power. His world consisted of flame-broiled burgers, difficult customers, and the constant struggle to make rent on his meager salary. He had dropped out of community college 2 years earlier when his father died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving his mother with medical bills that seemed to grow like weeds, no matter how much Marcus sent home to help. The Burger King job was supposed to be temporary, just until he got back on his feet. Like so many temporary things in life, it had become permanent. The restaurant sat at the intersection of Rockville Pike and Congressional Lane, a location that caught traffic from multiple directions. During the day, it served harried government workers grabbing quick lunches between meetings. At night, the clientele shifted to teenagers, late-shift workers, and the occasional person who seemed to have nowhere else to go. Marcus had learned to read customers in the way a sailor learns to read the weather, recognizing patterns and predicting behaviors before they even reached the counter. That Thursday night, as the 11 o'clock hour approached, a man walked in who immediately caught Marcus's attention. The customer was middle-aged, probably in his mid-50s, with graying hair cut in a style that suggested former military service. He wore an expensive-looking overcoat, despite the mild November weather, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. But what struck Marcus most was the man's demeanor. He moved with the careful precision of someone who was very aware of his surroundings, his eyes scanning the restaurant before he approached the counter, checking who else was present, where the exits were located. "Good evening," the man said, his voice flat and professional. "I'll take a Whopper, no onions, and a small coffee, black." Marcus rang up the order and noticed the man's hands as he pulled out his wallet. They were steady, no nervous trembling, but there was a small scar on the back of his right hand that looked like it might have come from a knife fight years ago. The man paid with exact change, counting out the bills and coins with methodical care, then moved to a corner booth that offered a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit in the back. While the customer waited for his order, Marcus watched him in the reflection of the stainless steel food warming area. The man kept glancing at his watch, an expensive Rolex that seemed incongruous with someone eating alone at a Burger King late on a Thursday night. He also kept looking out the window at the parking lot, though there was nothing particularly interesting to see, except the handful of cars that belonged to Marcus and the two other employees still cleaning up. When Marcus brought the food to the table, the man barely acknowledged him with a curt nod of thanks. He ate slowly, methodically, but Marcus noticed he left half the burger untouched. The man was killing time, Marcus realized, waiting for something or someone. In his 2 years working late shifts at this Burger King, Marcus had seen his share of odd behavior, people meeting lovers they shouldn't be with, parents picking up kids from estranged spouses, once even what he suspected was a drug deal happening in the parking lot. But this felt different. This man had the bearing of someone important, someone with real responsibilities, not some suburban dad sneaking around. At 11:32, according to the digital clock mounted above the soda fountain, another man entered the restaurant. This one was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a windbreaker. He ordered a Coke and immediately walked over to the booth where the first man sat. Marcus, pretending to wipe down nearby tables, positioned himself where he could observe without being obvious about it. The two men spoke in low voices, their heads close together across the table. The younger man pulled something from inside his windbreaker, a manila envelope that looked thick with papers. He slid it across the table, and the older man picked it up, weighing it in his hands before tucking it inside his overcoat. In exchange, the older man pulled out a white business envelope and passed it to the younger man, who quickly pocketed it without looking inside. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. The younger man stood up, left his untouched Coke on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without another word. The older man remained seated for another few minutes, finishing his coffee with the same methodical slowness he had shown with his burger. Then he too stood, dropped his trash in the bin near the door, and left. Marcus thought about it for maybe 5 minutes before deciding to tell his manager, Diane Crawford, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had been running this Burger King for 6 years. "Diane," he said as she counted the cash register, "I think I just saw something weird." Diane looked up from the bills spread across the counter. "Weird how?" Marcus described the two men, the exchange of envelopes, the furtive manner of their meeting. "It felt wrong," he explained, "like something from a spy movie." Diane listened, her expression skeptical. "Marcus, honey, this is Rockville, not Moscow. Probably just business guys doing some paperwork they didn't want to handle at the office. Or maybe it was drugs. Should we call the cops?" But Marcus shook his head. "It wasn't drugs. I've seen drug deals in the parking lot. This was different. These guys were too careful, too professional." "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" Diane asked, already losing interest as she returned to counting money. "We close in 20 minutes and I've got to get home to my kids. Can you at least write down what I saw?" Marcus persisted. "Just in case. The date, the time, what they looked like. If something comes of it later, at least there's a record." Diane sighed but pulled out the incident log they were supposed to use for robberies or equipment failures. "Fine. Describe them again, and I'll make a note. But I'm telling you, this is probably nothing." Marcus gave her detailed descriptions as she wrote them down in her cramped handwriting. The older man, 5 feet 10 inches tall, grey hair, expensive overcoat, Rolex watch, scar on right hand. The younger man, early 30s, dark hair, jeans, blue windbreaker. Time of exchange, 11:32 post-meridium. Date, November 14th, 1985. That night, as Marcus drove home through the empty streets of Rockville, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something significant. The way those men had moved, the way they had barely spoken, the careful choreography of their meeting. It had felt like watching a dance that had been rehearsed many times before. He thought about calling the police himself, but what would he even say? He saw two men exchange envelopes in a Burger King. They would laugh at him. Still, the uneasy feeling persisted. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, Marcus was reading the Washington Post over breakfast when he nearly choked on his coffee. There on the front page was a photograph of the older man from the Burger King. The headline read, "Navy contractor arrested in espionage investigation." The article explained that Arthur James Walker, a 50-year-old Navy veteran and defense contractor, had been arrested by the FBI on charges of espionage. He was the brother of John Anthony Walker, Jr., the Navy spy arrested back in May, and was suspected of passing classified documents about weapons systems and ship design to Soviet intelligence for over a decade. Marcus's hands trembled as he read. The article mentioned that Arthur Walker had been under surveillance by the FBI for months, but that investigators were still trying to identify other members of the spy network. The younger man, Marcus realized, the one who gave Arthur the envelope. That had to be another spy, someone the FBI didn't know about yet. He grabbed the phone and called the Burger King, hoping Diane would be there doing inventory like she usually did on Sunday mornings. She answered on the third ring, sounding harassed. "Rockville Burger King, what do you want?" "Diane, it's Marcus. Remember those two guys I saw on Thursday night? The ones with the envelopes, what about them?" She was clearly distracted, probably dealing with a supplier issue or broken equipment. "The older one. He's in the paper. Front page, he's a spy, Diane. He got arrested for espionage." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. His name is Arthur Walker, and the FBI is still looking for other members of his network. That younger guy who gave him the envelope, what if he's another spy they don't know about?" Diane's voice changed, taking on the same urgent tone she used when dealing with a grease fire or a customer having a heart attack. Okay, don't panic. Do you still have that incident log I filled out?" "No, you kept it. It should be in the manager's office, in that binder where you keep all the incident reports. I'm going to call the FBI right now. Can you come in? They'll probably want to talk to you." Marcus was at the restaurant in 15 minutes, still wearing his sweatpants and an old college t-shirt. Diane had already called the FBI's Washington field office and been transferred 3 times before reaching an agent who actually listened to what she had to say. When she mentioned Arthur Walker's name, the agent's entire demeanor changed. He told her to stay exactly where she was. Don't touch anything. Don't let Marcus leave. And that agents would be there within the hour. They arrived in 40 minutes, 2 men in dark suits who looked like they hadn't slept properly in weeks. The lead agent introduced himself as Special Agent Robert Hunter, and his partner was Special Agent David Morrison. Hunter had the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much betrayal in his career, while Morrison looked younger, more eager, like this was still exciting to him. Diane handed over the incident log, and Hunter read it carefully, his expression giving nothing away. Then he turned to Marcus. "Tell me everything you remember about Thursday night." Every detail, no matter how small it seems. Marcus walked them through it, from the moment Arthur Walker entered the restaurant to when he left. He described the expensive overcoat, the Rolex watch, the scar on the hand. He talked about how Walker had positioned himself in the corner booth with clear views of all exits. He described the younger man's arrival, the exchange of envelopes, the way neither man had said more than a few words. "Can you describe the younger man more specifically?" Morrison asked, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "Height, weight, distinguishing features?" Marcus closed his eyes, trying to bring back the memory. He was maybe 6 feet tall, athletic build, dark brown hair cut short, clean-shaven. He had on jeans and a blue windbreaker, Nike sneakers, white, mid-30s. His hands, when he pulled out that envelope, they were clean, no wedding ring. And he walked with confidence like military guys walk. Upright posture. What about his face? Any scars, moles, anything unusual? Marcus thought hard. There was something about his eyes. They were light-colored, maybe blue or gray, and he had a small mole on his left cheek right about here. Marcus touched his own cheek to demonstrate. It was small, but I noticed it. Hunter and Morrison exchanged glances. Hunter pulled out a folder from his briefcase and extracted several photographs, laying them face down on the table. "I'm going to show you some pictures," he said. "Take your time. Don't feel pressured to identify anyone, unless you're absolutely certain. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. This was real. He had actually witnessed part of a Soviet espionage operation. Hunter turned over the first photograph. It showed a man in his 40s with a beard. Marcus shook his head. Not him. The second photo was of a younger man with red hair. No. The third photo made Marcus stop. "That's him. That's the guy who met with Arthur Walker. You're certain?" Hunter's voice was sharp, intense. 100% certain. "That's the man who gave Walker the envelope." Hunter and Morrison looked at each other again, and this time Marcus could see something in their expressions. Relief, maybe, or vindication. Morrison closed his notebook and stood up. "We need to make a call. Don't go anywhere." The two agents stepped outside to their car, and through the window Marcus could see Hunter talking urgently into a radio, while Morrison made notes. They were outside for nearly 20 minutes. When they came back in, Hunter's entire demeanor had changed. He looked energized, alert in a way he hadn't before. "Marcus, what you witnessed on Thursday night was a meeting between Arthur Walker and a man named Gerald Michael Thompson. Thompson is a civilian contractor who works at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia. He has access to classified information about weapons guidance systems and radar technology. We've been watching him for the past 2 months because we suspected he might be involved with the Walker spy ring, but we didn't have any proof. Your testimony just gave us that proof." "What was in the envelopes?" Marcus asked. Hunter hesitated, then seemed to decide that Marcus deserved to know. "We believe the manila envelope Thompson gave to Walker contained classified documents or photographs of classified documents. The envelope Walker gave to Thompson probably contained cash payment for those documents. We won't know for certain until we arrest Thompson and search his home and office. But your description of the exchange matches the pattern we've seen with other members of this network. Are you going to arrest him?" "We already have a team moving on his location right now." Hunter checked his watch. "They should be executing the search warrant within the next 30 minutes. Morrison added, "We need you to come down to the field office and make a formal statement. We'll also want you to work with a sketch artist to create a detailed composite of Thompson, even though we already have his photograph. Sometimes witnesses remember details in the sketching process that they don't recall in initial interviews." Marcus spent the rest of Sunday at the FBI's Washington field office, going over his statement again and again, working with a sketch artist, looking at photographs of other potential suspects to see if he recognized anyone else. He didn't. The only people he had seen that night were Arthur Walker and Gerald Thompson. The FBI arrested Thompson that evening as he returned home from a friend's house. In his possession, they found $16,000 in cash, which he claimed was from selling a boat. A search of his home uncovered camera equipment, special film for photographing documents, and a cipher pad used for encrypting messages. In his office at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, investigators found evidence that he had been systematically copying classified documents for at least 3 years. Thompson's arrest led to additional discoveries. In exchange for a plea bargain, he provided information about the network's operations, confirming what the FBI had suspected. The Walker spy ring had been far more extensive than initially believed. John Walker had recruited his brother Arthur, his son Michael, and his friend Jerry Whitworth. But there had also been a network of support personnel, civilian contractors like Thompson, who provided documents in exchange for cash. The damage assessment was staggering. Over the 18 years that John Walker had operated as a Soviet spy, he had helped the Soviets decipher more than 1 million encrypted naval messages. He had provided information about submarine capabilities, ship movements, naval communications systems, and weapons technology. Caspar Weinberger, President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, concluded that the Soviet Union had made significant gains in naval warfare directly attributable to Walker's espionage. Arthur Walker was convicted and sentenced to 3 life sentences. His attempts to show remorse during his arrest constantly talking despite being read his rights and told to remain silent, had given investigators additional evidence against him. Gerald Thompson received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. John Walker himself had made a plea bargain, agreeing to provide full details of his espionage activities and testify against his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence for his son Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. For Marcus Jenkins, life changed in ways both large and small. The FBI initially asked him to keep his involvement quiet, not to discuss what he had witnessed or his role in Thompson's arrest. But word leaked out anyway, as these things always do. Within a month, reporters from the Washington Post and the New York Times were calling the Burger King, trying to get comments from the young man whose sharp eyes had helped crack a Soviet spy ring. Marcus declined all interviews. He didn't want fame or recognition. He had simply reported something that seemed wrong, something that his instincts told him mattered. The FBI awarded him a civilian commendation, a certificate that he framed and hung in his small apartment. More importantly to Marcus, they helped him get a job as a security analyst with a defense contractor, a position that paid 3 times what he had been making at Burger King and came with benefits, including educational assistance. He enrolled in night classes at Montgomery College, studying criminal justice. His mother, when he told her the story over the phone, cried with a mixture of pride and terror at how close he had come to danger. "You could have been hurt," she said, "if those men had known you were watching." "But I wasn't hurt," Marcus assured her, "and I did the right thing." That has to count for something. The incident changed how Marcus saw the world around him. He had always thought of espionage as something that happened in distant countries, in novels and movies, not in suburban Maryland burger joints. The realization that spies could be anywhere, could look like ordinary people living ordinary lives, was both frightening and illuminating. The Cold War, which had seemed like an abstract concept from history textbooks, suddenly felt immediate and real. Special Agent Robert Hunter stayed in touch with Marcus over the following months. He explained that Marcus's observation had been the missing piece in a puzzle the FBI had been trying to solve for nearly a year. They had known someone was still active in the Walker network, someone who was passing documents to Arthur Walker, but they hadn't been able to identify who. The surveillance teams watching Arthur had lost him on multiple occasions, and he had been clever about varying his patterns and using counter-surveillance techniques. "Your description of the meeting was so detailed," Hunter told Marcus over coffee one afternoon in early December. "You noticed things that most people would have missed. The watch, the scar, the way he positioned himself in that booth. Those details helped us confirm that this wasn't just some random business meeting. And your identification of Thompson from the photograph, that was rock solid. The defense attorney tried to challenge it in court, but your testimony was too consistent, too detailed. You remembered things you couldn't have known to look for unless you had actually witnessed what you claimed." Marcus asked the question that had been bothering him since that Sunday morning when he saw Arthur Walker's picture in the newspaper. How long would Thompson have kept spying if I hadn't seen that meeting? Hunter was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Honestly, we were getting close to him anyway. We had narrowed our suspect list down to about a dozen people who had access to the types of documents Arthur was receiving. Thompson was on that list, but so were 11 others. It might have taken us another 3 months, maybe 6, to focus on him specifically. And in that time he would have kept passing secrets to the Soviets. Every week of delay meant more compromised information, more classified documents in enemy hands. So yes, Marcus, what you did mattered. It mattered a lot. The case had broader implications for American counterintelligence. The Walker spy ring exposed serious weaknesses in how the Navy and defense contractors handled classified information. Background checks had been inadequate, security procedures were lax, and there was insufficient oversight of personnel with access to sensitive materials. The arrests in 1985, what the press had dubbed the Year of the Spy, forced a comprehensive review of security protocols across the intelligence community. Congress held hearings, demanding answers about how so many spies had operated undetected for so long. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence issued a report in October 1986 titled Meeting the Espionage Challenge, which called for sweeping reforms to counterintelligence programs. The Defense Personnel and Security Research Center was founded specifically in response to the Walker case, tasked with studying security vulnerabilities and developing better methods for detecting insider threats. For Marcus, the most surreal moment came in January 1986, when he received a letter from the director of the FBI, thanking him for his civic duty and his attention to detail. The letter, written on official FBI stationery and signed by the director himself, seemed almost impossible to believe. 2 years earlier, Marcus had been worried about making rent and wondering if he would ever get his life together. Now he was being thanked by the head of the FBI for helping to catch Soviet spies. He showed the letter to his mother when he visited her in Pennsylvania that winter. She read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. "Your father would have been so proud," she said. "He always told you to pay attention, to notice things. Remember how he used to quiz you on details when you were little? What color was that car? How many people were in that restaurant? He said, observation was a skill that would serve you well in life." Marcus remembered. His father had been a police officer in a small town, and he had taught Marcus to see the world with a cop's eyes. "Notice the details," his father had always said. "The little things tell you the story." Marcus had thought those lessons would only be useful if he became a police officer himself, which had never been his plan. But those skills, that habit of observation, had led to him noticing 2 men exchanging envelopes in a Burger King on a Thursday night in November. The trial of Gerald Thompson took place in March 1986. Marcus testified, describing what he had witnessed in careful detail. Thompson's defense attorney tried to suggest that Marcus had been mistaken, that he couldn't be certain of what he had seen, that the lighting in the restaurant had been poor. But Marcus's testimony held firm. He had seen what he had seen, and he had documented it immediately after it happened. The jury convicted Thompson on 7 counts of espionage and conspiracy. After the trial, Morrison, the younger FBI agent, took Marcus aside in the courthouse hallway. "You did good in there," he said. "Defense attorneys always try to rattle civilian witnesses, make them doubt themselves. You didn't give him an inch." "I just told the truth," Marcus replied. "I saw what I saw. That's what makes you a good witness. You're not trying to embellish or make yourself sound more important. You're just reporting facts." Morrison handed Marcus his business card. "Look, I know you're going to school for criminal justice. When you graduate, if you're interested in a career with the Bureau, give me a call. We need people who have your eye for detail and your integrity." Marcus took the card, tucking it carefully into his wallet. He had already been thinking about applying to the FBI Academy. The work excited him in a way that his security analyst job, while better than Burger King, didn't quite match. He wanted to be on the front lines of protecting national security, not just reviewing reports and checking credentials. The story of how a Burger King worker helped crack a Soviet spy ring became something of a legend in FBI circles. Training instructors at Quantico used it as an example of why cultivating relationships with ordinary citizens mattered, why encouraging people to report suspicious activity was crucial to counterintelligence work. Most espionage cases, the instructors explained, aren't solved through high-tech surveillance or complicated undercover operations. They're solved through old-fashioned police work, following leads and paying attention to details. Marcus's observation had been the kind of detail that mattered. 2 men meeting late at night in a fast food restaurant, exchanging envelopes with practiced precision. In isolation, it might have meant nothing. But in the context of an ongoing espionage investigation, in the year of the spy, when the FBI was desperately trying to identify remaining members of the Walker network, that single observation had been the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. The Cold War would continue for another 6 years after Thompson's arrest, not ending until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. But the damage from the Walker spy ring would resonate for decades. Naval officers who had served during those years knew that their operations had been compromised, that Soviet submarines had been able to track American vessels because John Walker had provided the encryption keys to decode naval communications. Families of sailors who had died in accidents or incidents during the 1970s and 80s sometimes wondered if Soviet intelligence, gained through the Walker network, had played a role in their loved ones' deaths. Marcus graduated from Montgomery College in 1988 with an associate degree in criminal justice. He applied to the FBI Academy and was accepted on his first try, thanks in part to a strong recommendation from Special Agent Robert Hunter. During his training at Quantico, he met other agents who had worked on the Walker case, who told him stories about the investigation that had never made it into the newspapers. The dead drops in suburban Maryland, the coded messages in newspaper classified ads, the payments made in remote parking lots, the careful choreography of espionage that he had glimpsed for just a few minutes on that Thursday night in November. He also learned about the human cost of espionage. Soviet citizens who had been spying for the United States, whose identities had been compromised by Aldrich Ames and other American traitors, had been arrested and executed. CIA officers who had spent years developing sources behind the Iron Curtain had watched their networks collapse. The year of the spy had been devastating, not just because of the secrets stolen, but because of the lives destroyed on both sides of the conflict. Marcus served with the FBI for 26 years, retiring in 2014 as a supervisory special agent in the Counterintelligence Division. Over his career, he worked on cases involving Chinese espionage, Russian intelligence operations, and even a few instances of industrial espionage. But he never forgot that November night in Rockville, the night when everything changed because he had paid attention to two men exchanging envelopes in a Burger King. In retirement, Marcus sometimes gave talks to community groups about vigilance and civic responsibility. He told them the story of that Thursday night. Though by then most people had forgotten about the Walker spy ring, had forgotten about the year of the spy entirely. The Cold War seemed like ancient history to younger generations who had grown up after the Soviet Union's collapse. But Marcus believed the lessons were still relevant. Espionage hadn't ended with the Cold War. Spies still operated in American cities, recruiting sources, stealing secrets, threatening national security. The difference, Marcus told his audiences, is that today's spies are often working for China or Russia or Iran, not the Soviet Union. But the principles remain the same. They recruit people who have access to classified information. They exploit financial troubles, ideological grievances, or personal weaknesses. And they operate in plain sight, in ordinary places, counting on the fact that most people don't pay attention to details. If you see something that doesn't feel right, Marcus would say, report it. Don't assume someone else will notice. Don't tell yourself it's probably nothing. Trust your instincts. In my case, I was a 23-year-old kid working at a Burger King. I had no training, no experience with espionage. But I knew something was wrong with what I was seeing, and I reported it. That's all any of us can do. Pay attention, trust our instincts, and report what seems suspicious. Special Agent Robert Hunter retired from the FBI in 1999. He and Marcus stayed in touch over the years, meeting for coffee every few months to catch up on each other's lives. Hunter told Marcus that the Thompson arrest had been a turning point in his own career, leading to a promotion and eventually to a position in FBI headquarters working on counterintelligence policy. But more than the career benefits, Hunter said, the case had reminded him why he had joined the Bureau in the first place. We get so caught up in the bureaucracy sometimes, Hunter explained during one of their coffee meetings in 2008. The paperwork, the politics, the turf battles between agencies. It's easy to forget that what we do actually matters. But then a kid working at a Burger King notices something wrong and has the courage to report it. And suddenly we're rolling up a spy network that's been damaging national security for years. That's when you remember why this work is important. Gerald Thompson served 18 years of his 25-year sentence before being released on parole in 2004. He moved to a small town in Montana and lived quietly, working as a handyman and avoiding any contact with his former associates from the spy ring. In a rare interview with a journalist in 2010, Thompson expressed regret for his actions, but claimed he had only been following orders from people he thought were on America's side. The journalist noted that Thompson seemed to have convinced himself of this revised history, unable or unwilling to acknowledge that he had knowingly committed espionage for Soviet intelligence. John Walker died in prison in 2014 at the age of 77. His brother Arthur had died in federal prison in 2014 at age 79. Jerry Whitworth, Walker's best friend and accomplice, remained in federal prison. having been sentenced to 365 years for his role in the spy ring. Michael Walker, John's son, was released in 2000 and has lived under an assumed name, trying to build a life away from the shadow of his father's treason. The manila envelope that Gerald Thompson passed to Arthur Walker in that Burger King on November 14, 1985, was never recovered. It had presumably been passed along to Arthur's Soviet handlers before his arrest. But based on Thompson's later confession and the FBI's reconstruction of events, investigators believed the envelope contained photographs of classified documents related to the Aegis combat system, a sophisticated radar and weapons control system used on Navy cruisers. The information would have given Soviet naval planners valuable insights into American defensive capabilities. The white envelope that Arthur Walker gave to Thompson contained $5,000 in cash, Thompson's payment for that particular delivery of secrets. It was less than he had hoped for, Thompson later admitted, but he needed the money. He had gambling debts, a mortgage he couldn't afford, and a lifestyle that exceeded his legitimate income. Like so many others who betray their country, Thompson's motivation had been primarily financial rather than ideological. For Marcus Jenkins, looking back on that November night from the perspective of retirement, the most striking thing was how ordinary it had all seemed at the time. Two middle-aged men meeting in a fast food restaurant. It could have been anything, a business deal, friends catching up, even a father meeting a son. But something about it had felt wrong to Marcus's instincts, those habits of observation his police officer father had instilled in him from childhood. The lesson, Marcus came to believe, was that defending national security wasn't just the responsibility of intelligence agencies and military forces. It was also the responsibility of ordinary citizens who paid attention to their surroundings and reported things that seemed suspicious. Most of those reports would turn out to be nothing, innocent activities misunderstood or misinterpreted. But occasionally, one of those reports would be the key that unlocked a major case. In Marcus's case, his report about two men exchanging envelopes in a Burger King had helped identify the last undetected member of one of the most damaging spy rings in American history. It had led to an arrest, a conviction, and the recovery of classified information before it could cause additional harm. And it had started a chain of events that changed Marcus's own life, leading him to a career in law enforcement and counterintelligence that he found deeply meaningful. The story resonated because it demonstrated that espionage wasn't some abstract concept from movies and novels. It was real, it happened in ordinary places, and ordinary people could make a difference in detecting and stopping it. The suburban Burger King where Marcus worked was torn down in 1993 to make room for a shopping center. But for those who knew the story, that intersection of Rockville Pike and Congressional Lane would always be remembered as the place where a young man's attention to detail helped protect American national security during one of the tensest periods of the Cold War. The Cold War was full of dramatic moments, summits between world leaders, nuclear standoffs, proxy wars fought in distant countries. But it was also fought in quieter ways, in the daily work of intelligence officers and counterintelligence agents, in the decisions made by ordinary citizens to speak up when something seemed wrong. Marcus Jenkins represented the latter category, the ordinary American who found himself in an extraordinary situation and chose to act rather than look away. His testimony at Thompson's trial had been crucial, but perhaps more important was the message it sent to other potential spies. They weren't invisible. They weren't safe just because they operated in suburban restaurants instead of dark alleys. Someone was always watching, always noticing, always ready to report suspicious behavior. That uncertainty, that knowledge that they could be observed and identified at any moment, made espionage more difficult and more dangerous for those who engaged in it. The Year of the Spy, 1985, marked a watershed moment in American counterintelligence. The multiple arrests and convictions demonstrated both the extent of Soviet espionage efforts and the improving capability of American intelligence agencies to detect and stop those efforts. Marcus's role in that larger story was small, a single observation on a single night. But small observations accumulated and analyzed were how intelligence work actually functioned. The grand theories and strategic insights were built on foundations of specific details, noticed and reported by people who cared enough to pay attention. As Marcus settled into retirement, spending time with his grandchildren and working on his memoirs, he sometimes thought about that Thursday night in November 1985. He wondered what would have happened if he had been too tired to notice, too busy with closing duties to pay attention to his customers, too hesitant to report what he saw. Thompson would have kept spying, more secrets would have been compromised, the damage to national security would have continued, but he had noticed, he had reported it. And in the complex web of causes and effects that make up history, his actions had mattered. That knowledge, more than any commendation or award, was what gave Marcus satisfaction when he looked back on his life. He had been in the right place at the right time, and he had done the right thing. In the end, what more could anyone ask? And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories, and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.